to order the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, March 10th. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So I just noticed my camera zooms. I want to turn that off. I don't want the auto framing thing on. Good. Okay. That's a new feature I was not aware of. So, moving on to first selectwoman's updates, I think just a key thing to know is we had the town preliminary budget hearing with a budget hearing with the Board of Selectmen recommended budget and the Board of Education recommended budget. It was presented on Thursday to the public, and it's available on the website. There's a slide deck, and if you do have questions, you can submit them. If you want to email them to my office or to the Board of Finance, and then we'll try to answer in writing any questions that you might have on that. Next step is there'll be the Board of Finance is deliberating right now on the proposed budgets. So there's some workshops on the calendar that are open to the public, and then March 31st is the next budget public hearing to get feedback on what their recommended budget is. And then the target is to have a referendum on April 29th. So and this will be the first time that we will be voting for a budget in the end of April. We'll do the new charter. We can move the schedule up a little bit. And I do want to highlight that we are going to be District 1. People should have received a postcard from the town indicating that we have to temporarily change the polling location for District 1 because of the work being conducted at Polson. And you will be voting at the Senior Center for all of 2026. So I just want to highlight that again. Hopefully you received a postcard if you are in District 1. If you typically vote at Polson, this year you will be voting at the Senior Center, and I just want to highlight that. And we'll continue to put out reminders about that moving forward. So with that, I guess I opened up for liaison reports or selectmen comments.
The Madison 200 committee is beginning to populate the calendar, which is found on the town website, with dozens and dozens of events which will be taking place throughout this year of 2026. And so I'm sure that we'll be giving that ever more prominence on the website, but it's already being filled in now. So you can find it right on the main page of the town website.
Okay, great. And I just encourage people to follow that. It's there's a lot of cool things. The biggest event will be the last Saturday in June, which is our town party at the Surf Club. It's to coincide with the Strawberry Moon. And it should be a great event, and more information will be forthcoming on that. But that's kind of the big event that the town is going to be hosting just for our bicentennial.
The only thing I want to share is that as of today, the Senior Commission resumes their monthly meetings schedule. So if anybody is interested in following along with those, they meet in person at the Senior Center. No Zoom option available, but guests are always welcome to attend. And so they'll be meeting in person for the next several months until we get into the dark hours of winter again.
Okay. Anybody else? Scott, looks like you have an update.
No, I don't have an update.
Okay, good.
No, I'm
All right,
good
Bruce?
today. Yeah.
Bruce, no?
Nothing for me.
Okay, great. All right. So we will move on then to citizens' comments. Please raise your hand and state your name and address, and keep your comments to 2 minutes, please.
Go ahead, Robert.
Hey guys, how are you? Robert Letskis, Refined Living, 32 Madison, 32 Hathaway Lane in Madison. Just wanted to touch base. It's been a while since we talked, and wanted to send my condolences for the passing of Vinny Garofalo. Him and I had a long history, and I'm sorry for your loss. I really am, and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Tim yet, the building inspector, but I've heard a lot of good things, and looking forward to working with him at some point. I had an extensive conversation with Trent today for the health department. In case any residents don't know, I'm one of the respondents for the Academy School redevelopment. Trent didn't have access to my numbers for the gallons per day for the septic system, so I just want to be real quick. I'm going to be under 2 minutes for you guys. 28 efficiency units at 4,200, 200 person restaurant with 30 gallons per day at 6,000. 300 short-term visitors at 1,500 brings me to just under 12,000 gallons per day for the septic. Um, in Clinton, I'm going to be building 6 condos there where we have actually multiple septic systems potentially being designed. So there is a chance that we could actually do multiple septic systems here and stay under the threshold of 7,500, which would be a DEEP system with the state. Hopefully we could do that. Depends on the creativity of my engineers. Thirdly is the CMDA, the Connecticut Municipal Development Authority, David Corres. I think I would highly support the town to opt into that program. I literally just um, vouched for that in another town, and I think it's a really good thing for the town of Madison to do. There's no downside. There's $90 million available in funding for businesses or developers to help facilitate downtowns and transit-oriented development. So I think for infrastructure purposes, especially that the whole town is on septic, especially, downtown area, it might make a lot of sense to potentially opt into that program. I would support it. Considering the fact that number four, considering the fact that I believe Memorial Town Hall would be a perfect building for a theater based on what the facilities committee is recommending, or it's just an idea for now. We are going to be removing the theater portion of the front of the Academy School redevelopment proposal and exploring the potential of a food-oriented business, something like either a high-end bakery or a deli. We're actually in discussion with some business owners that are very successful here in Madison that have a heavy interest in the space. And last but not least, I sat on an EDC meeting last month where the new prospective tenant for the old Roberts grocery store here in North Madison, um, there's a gentleman that's looking to take over the space and invest $3 million. And the committee members were actually considering going and taking a look at his operation, which triggered a light bulb for me. I think it might make sense for the board to come and look at the respondents' jobs. We have something 20 minutes away. It's a historic building.
So
Um,
if I may weigh in, I think we're past the limit, but
sorry,
just to
sorry.
wrap up your
Yep.
comment,
All
that's
right, not a
okay.
problem. Yeah, not
A
a
lot, a
problem.
lot to cover, I know.
Yeah. I would just love the board to come and see our work. That's all I could say. Anyway, thank you very much for your service.
Thank you. Okay, any other hands raised?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to item number 6. Actually, before we go on to the business item, I actually wanted to make a motion to postpone item number 7 on the agenda to follow item number 13 on the agenda, just in order to accommodate, kind of put some of the business stuff together real quickly in the beginning of the meeting, get that done, and then we can move on to the broader discussion. So I have a motion to do that. Okay,
Second.
all right, great. Any further conversations? Everybody's okay moving that down on the agenda?
Mhm.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll move on to item number 8. And will be beneficial to staff to kind of move through some of this items. Item number 8 is discuss and take action to approve
You need
a
to do your
return.
consent agenda.
Oh, geez. All right, sorry. Moving on to item number 6 in the business section. I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Moved.
Second.
Okay, any further comments or questions? Do want to shout out on our proclamation regarding Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Any other comment or questions on the agenda? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so moving on to item number 8. Discuss and take action to approve a return of $282,457.47 from CIP residual project balances to the master account in the CNRE fund pending Board of Finance approval.
So moved.
Okay. All right, Al, you're muted, just so you know. Okay. All right. So basically this is extra money left over from other projects that we would be returning to the master account. I don't know, there was some detail in your packet about this. Is there any further questions on that, on the funds? Do we want to dig into that, or, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, with that, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All right, great. Motion passes. Item number 9, discuss and take action to approve the application for a LOTSIP grant in the amount of $1,167,000,
Million.
$1,167,600 for the Scotland Avenue roadway improvement project.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I'd like to just actually have Rob talk a few minutes about this, because this is a big project that the town has been moving forward to do all these improvements in Scotland. We did receive a state grant for this, but there would have been a larger cost. There would have been a matching component to this, and the project cost has gone up a bit. But there's been a lot of creative work done by Rob, working with our Council of Governments to get this so we could get some state funding. So Rob, I'll let you just talk about it real quickly.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, just very briefly, a couple of years back, we received an $800,000 community connectivity grant for Scotland road improvements. Basically, in very, very briefly, it includes reclamation of the roadway, significant drainage improvements throughout the corridor, as well as sidewalk on the west side of Scotland from Boston Post Road to Railroad Avenue, and then there's a short section on the east side from Railroad Avenue to J.C. Field. Again, we had our public information meeting last year. It was well attended. Our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee did a great job getting the word out there, and well attended, very well received. Again, this is one of the better public information meetings as far as attendance and sort of support of a project. So that being said, you know, as our engineer moved forward with the preliminary design, going from the preliminary design to the final design, we saw that there was a significant budget shortfall in this. We had money allocated in our CIP as well as the 800,000 community connectivity grant. So even though it's not a collector road, which is a requirement of the LOTSIP program, with the great work of Stantec, our consultant, we were able to come up with, in working with Jim Road at the Scrog, we were able to come up with a plan to, at least for the sidewalk portion of the project and all like the incidental items, that would qualify for a LOTSIP funding. Sidewalk standalone projects qualify, even if it's not a collector road. So Stantec really this estimate is really beautifully done. There's multiple columns separating the town's portion, the community connectivity grant portion, and the LOTSIP portion. And that version of the estimate's gone back and forth a few times with the DOT. But we're just about ready to submit our sort of final draft, and with some responses to their comments. So we just wanted to get it on the agenda today to discuss with all of you and make you aware that that we would like to move forward with applying for the additional funding. Not to take up any more of your time, but just one quick point. Generally, when you do these LOTSIP applications, they're pretty onerous sort of applications. We're not doing a LOTSIP application in the traditional sense. Really, this is a community connectivity grant program project. We're just seeking supplemental funding through the LOTSIP program. So with the hope is, with your approval, we'd like to move forward and apply for this additional, it's over $1 million, as you can see on the agenda, which is significant. That would reduce the town's share to somewhere in the area of $600,000, which a large portion of that is already allocated to CIP. So this $1 million is really important for us to complete this project in its entirety and in a timely manner.
So, and this is a project that's gone through the CIP process. We already accepted a grant for the project from the state of Connecticut. So this is just getting additional funding so we don't have to make up that gap. So it's a win-win in my view. We're lucky that they were able to kind of work with us to use lots of funds for this. So any other questions for that? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
great. Okay, item number 10 is discuss and take action to refer the Planning and Zoning Commission under Connecticut Statute 824, the transfer of approximately 7.5 acres of tidal wetlands known as MAP 32 Lot 12 and a public access easement on 178 Cottage Road, MAP 32 Lot 9, which will include a constructed deck, sidewalk, and stairs, plus 4 dedicated parking spaces from DMV Flow Ventures LLC to the town of Madison.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I'll let Aaron explain this, but this is basically a developer giving land to the town of Madison, and it was part of a plan that was approved by Planning and Zoning Commission a few years ago. This is the project that is called Madison Landing, I think is the term for it, that it had been called over on the east end of town near the border with Clinton. And so I guess the developer is thinking of moving forward. In order to execute their plan, they have to give this land to the town. So this is kind of fulfilling an obligation that they had on their site plan approval. But Aaron, if you just want to expound a little bit on it.
Sure.
And maybe show the map up on the screen. Do you have that handy?
I can pull that up. Yes. You know what, I'll just do the GIS real quick for you. I did put most of my comments into a memo to you, and I'll limit some of my talking just because of my frogginess today. No one really wants to listen to this. But as Peggy mentioned, this was an approval in 2018 from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the
If you
developer...
want, Aaron, real quick, I can just share the memo because I have the memo up. Do you want me just to do that? Because it's got a graphic in it. Is that
Sure.
easier?
Yeah, I have the GIS as well, if that's...
Whatever shows it better. So it's up to you.
Sure. So here we go.
All right.
I'll screen share. This is an aerial view here of the property. This portion here is Salt Meadow Park, as well as this piece here where the current dog park sits. This is a little bit older aerial photo. The subject property includes lot 3214, 3210, and 32.9. The tidal wetland piece that the developer is looking to donate to the town is this parcel 32-12. It is almost entirely inland tidal wetland, excuse me. There may be some small portion of upland, but not really anything that is developable. The applicant at the time in 2018 volunteered to donate this piece to the town, as well as grant a public access easement along this front portion of the existing boat warehouse building. And as part of the improvements there, there will be 4 dedicated parking spaces in the proposed parking lot, as well as a large deck on the front view. And this really is just for viewing pleasure of the river. And the applicant brought forward these proposals really to show consistency with the state's Coastal Management Act and to enhance public access to our coastal resources and the water dependent uses here. And so in order to move forward with the development of the site, the property was recently sold last year to a new developer. And the condition of approval with planning and zoning was that these land transfers and easements must be executed prior to any site construction activities. So if there was a desire not to accept these, the easement or the wetland piece, they would be required to return to the Planning and Zoning Commission. It was not a requirement of the Planning and Zoning Commission. However, it was incorporated into as a condition of approval because the developer had volunteered these transfers. And really the benefit would be for enhanced habitat protection, as well as simple expansion of the park and that buffer area to the development. Do you have any questions?
Just real quick. So the process though is if we vote to refer it, right? We would
Yes.
still be voting to accept the land later, right? Don't we have to then, this is just to have planning and zoning
Yes.
refer. Okay, so there would be another conversation that would be actually to vote to accept, and then this does not go, it's a donation, basically, right? And because of the value of the property, it does not require town meeting approval.
That's correct. Because the value is less than $250,000, it will not require a town meeting approval. And it would just be Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance after the 824 referral to P&Z.
Okay, and
Aaron, in terms of timing, our vote to accept this land at a later date, is that, what if the project falls through after we accept the transfer?
Well, the approval stands, and believe it or not, it is valid for 19 years from the original date of approval because of COVID and statutory extensions that were done. So the property could transfer to another developer, in which case the approval runs with the land, and they would be able to move forward with the project. If the developer were looking to amend the project in some manner, they would be required to return to planning and zoning. It's a special exception use as well as a coastal site plan.
At what point in this process do the selectmen vote to accept the land?
That would be after the referral of the 824 referral to P&Z. So planning, if you are comfortable moving this forward for the Planning and Zoning Commission to review for consistency with our plan of conservation and development, they would then make hopefully a favorable recommendation back to the board, and citing how this proposal would be consistent with the plan of conservation and development. And then it would be up to the board after that at a subsequent meeting to take your vote on that, and then move that forward to the Board of Finance.
Thank you.
Aaron, what is the thinking behind moving a piece of undevelopable land out of private hands and into public hands?
I can only assume, Bruce, because I wasn't part of those meetings. There was not a whole lot of discussion in the minutes on this transfer. I think it was this was a controversial application at the time. I believe there was a lot of concern raised as part of the DEEP referral, and the analysts up at the state level at the time regarding habitat protection. As we know, there are critical species or species of concern that do live at Salt Meadow and in this tidal area, especially that wooded upland in between where the development and the formal field area is on the park. And so I think, another is the originally approved plan of Salt Meadow did include a public boat launch, like a kayak launch, and it was really kind of through this channel here, and so that could align with the original development plan, and give the town a little bit more flexibility, at least for ownership of properties, if they do wish to move forward with that kayak launch area. I know there is a small launch currently in this portion of the river, but that was part of the original master plan for Salt Meadow.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, Aaron, the design was actually a handicapped uh, kayak launch. I don't know if that's still in the plan, but that was what we talked about.
The plan has not been modified since the original approval. So yes, it was a long pier style launch off of there.
Yep.
Really, aside from that, Bruce, I mean, it's not a high value piece of property, most of which is regulated through the state. Very limited development opportunity. It's really, I think, really the only reason we should consider that is because it is contiguous with Salt Meadow. That's really it.
All right.
I mean, I think there might be some questions that come later. What does this mean in terms of, maintenance obligations because it's a wetland, all that stuff to accept this. But I think at this point, I'm comfortable just moving forward with the referral to planning, to planning and zoning.
Yeah, it's very much
Yeah.
like a mud flat type.
Yeah.
If you've ever walked down where some of the existing runway still exists on the west side, it's very similar to that.
And the positive is that I guess we can maintain some control if we wanted to create some sort of access to the river. Now we have control over that piece of property. So, any other questions for Aaron on this? No? All right. All in favor, say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. All right. And then this will be coming back to us at one point. So I'm sure planning and zoning, if there's any other concerns, it'll come up through their commission review. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 11, discuss and take action to award a contract between the town of Madison and Bob Thomas Ford for the purchase of a 2026 Ford F-550 chassis in an amount not to exceed $61,880 below state contract for the brush truck replacement as approved in the 2025-26 capital improvement program, Madison hose apparatus truck replacement, reserve brush truck replacement, and to authorize the first selectman to sign all documents associated with this award.
Moved.
Second.
Okay, this is obviously part of CAP. The funds are there. It's just moving forward with the purchase. I don't know if there's any additional questions on this. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Item number 12 is discuss and take action to award a contract between the town of Madison and Vengent Apparatus for the purchase of a Ford F-550 apparatus body and all related equipment in an amount not to exceed $174,800. The contract is through the Sourcewell Purchasing Consortium for the brush truck replacement as approved in the 2025 capital improvement program, Madison hose apparatus, truck placement reserve, and to authorize the first selectman to sign all documents associated with this award.
Moved.
Second.
Okay, and this is just the same process, and funding is already available. So any further comments or questions? No? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Item number 13 is discuss and take action to call a public hearing at Town Campus Hammonasset Room C and on Zoom on Tuesday, March 31st, 2026 at 7 p.m. for the purpose of discussing the town and Board of Education budgets as recommended.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, this is just formalizing the call. We have kind of a window when we have to call the public hearing for the budget process. And this is just, we've been kind of working all along that it was going to be on the state, but here we're just formally doing it so they can publish the notices. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. All right, so now we I'm moving on to one of our more significant topics, the follow-up on Academy. So we've moved that to be after item number 13. And so I know we have there was a lot of materials that were provided to the board. And I attempted to summarize some of that in a document that I prepared. And I thought what we could do is talk a little bit about, I'll put up my slides, we'll go through one or two of them, and then I do want to invite Michael Harris, who's on, to give his presentation. We didn't receive it in advance. I know he's had kind of a crazy schedule the last week. So I'll let him kind of weigh in, but let me just start by highlighting what we're doing here today. I also know that Ben has a hard stop. Let's see. Can you see that? Can you guys see the presentation?
Yeah, it's tiny though. Can you make
It's
it bigger?
very,
There you
there you
go.
go.
Yep.
Okay, great. A little delay there. So just to highlight again what we're doing, this was what we had talked about at our last meeting. It was, I think, in January, and then obviously things got delayed because of the blizzard when we moved this meeting. We had decided to do some due diligence review on things using town staff and reach out to some boards and commissions. So the middle column kind of highlights what we had spoken about at the last meeting. To review where we are to date, you have in your packet memos from town staff addressing some of the questions that have been raised. We didn't get anything formal from the police or emergency medical. That might have been a little bit my error. I know Sam weighed in on some of those issues, so we can easily get some more data points or find specifically what we want to get from the police department. Boards and commissions, we did get a formal memo from the Facilities Committee, the Historical Society, and the Economic Development Commission. Affordable housing, I know Aaron had spoken to them and they had opted not to submit anything formal. And I also know that they did not meet in February for scheduling reasons. Um, I don't think we formally requested something from the Historic District Commission because I think I was mixing up Historical Society with District Commission, but that's obviously going to be an important piece of anything that we move forward. So I've got to close the loop on that. I did not formally ask the Police Commission because we had not coordinated with the police department. Beach and Rec, I don't think was formally requested, but Austin did provide just some quick thoughts on this. And then one I put on there was WPCA. As we talk about the septic issue, it might be a conversation we might want to have with the WPCA. So those are things that so we've got some things that have been completed and then a few gaps that we have. And then obviously today on some of the economic and tax implications, we have a presentation from Rex Development to talk about what his thoughts are with the options laid before us. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about this further due diligence. We had talked last time, we wanted to proceed a little bit more about that park option, that there are some people in town that are requesting that we consider, demolishing the building and building a park. And what would that cost? I did ask Antonazi and Associates, who is advising us on the facilities committee, to pull together just a very high level kind of order of magnitude type of thing of what it could cost if you were to take the property and then put some improvements on it. That's in your packet. That was pulled together very quickly. It is not a park design. It is not promoting any ideas, but it just gives you an idea of no matter what you do there, given the size of the acreage, and this is just limited to where the building is, what potentially costs we could see to do some sort of improvements after the demolition happens. So they kind of gave this rough range of $2 to $4 million, and it all really depends on what we want to do with it. And I know that in conversations with staff, particularly, they felt that why we should, to us, we have that conversation after we decide to demolish, right? It really should be, do we want to demo the building or not? It shouldn't be focused on what we do with that space afterwards. Because, then the conversation is, are we warehousing the empty land for a future building? Do we want to spend a lot of money on improvements on the building that we might want to step back and use that space for something else? So, but it gives you an idea of order of magnitude. So you're looking at, anywhere from 5 to, $9-10 million for park per se, if you put demo in addition to improvements to the site. So that, I don't think today is really a big conversation about that, but I was trying to follow up on some of the board requests for that. And we can talk if we want to do some more work on that, later in the meeting. So I did, come back with some, try to highlight what the commission letter stated. And, it really is what our priorities are. One is going to be more of an economic end for the town, potentially that, and then others is balancing that with this historic kind of campus concept that we have with those buildings, not just Academy, but also Memorial Town Hall and the Powder House and the chapel building that we call the Youth and Family Building. And so trying to balance all that together. And so I think that the Economic Development Commission, and I know they're here and we can bring some of them up later to weigh in this. I'm just summarizing right now, felt that this could be a really an important economic driver of the hotel. And they came up very strong in terms of recommending that as the best proposal to move forward with. I think the Facilities Committee took a more, less definitive approach, but did feel that both the mixed use, which was the housing with some commercial marketplace components, and then the hotel had really attractive proposals. And then they weighed in on the fact that if we decided not to pursue those, that there was a way to maybe preserve somehow the front part of the building for some sort of amphitheater or community use. And then the Historical Society did come out in support of private development to preserve the building. But they also had concern about maintaining the ball fields for public use. So these were just kind of some high level takeaways. And from the committees, and we can allow them to speak later if we want to pull them up. And then the staff did provide some detailed feedback, but I thought for interest of time, I'd like to turn over to Michael Harris so he can kind of do his presentation, and then we can come back to some of the staff feedback. So with that, I don't know I know Michael's on, if he could be elevated, I will stop sharing my presentation. I know he has some information to share with us. Okay. Jeannie, is he, okay, great.
Hi there, and good afternoon. I apologize. It took me a little bit longer to log back in as a panelist. I apologize. I'm currently at a conference down in DC for the Economic Development Administration, which is a fascinating time to be hearing from our federal partners. Very excited to be back talking to you again about this project. As those who were there in November may remember, I'm the Executive Director of Rex Development, which is the Economic Development District for the 15 towns of the New Haven region. And in that role, we're designated by the EDA in being a planning partner for economic development strategy throughout the region. And through a partnership with the Council of Governments, we have on-call economic development services for the towns throughout the region. And so going back several years, the Rex Development team through Dale Croup has been supporting consideration of reuse at the Academy School site. And that has included development of some of the aspects of the community center proposal, as well as the expression of interest process that we're currently in. So I joined the organization this last summer, and First Select Women asked me to help participate in review of these proposals. And so in our process to date, we have gone through and reviewed those proposals that were received earlier in the fall, as well as created an initial presentation with our findings and recommendations that was shared at a meeting in mid-November. I'm going to share my screen with a little bit of thoughts and policy along the way. Since then, we created a set of questions that we assisted the town in drafting, which were attempting to drill down into some of the questions that the expression of interest was asking. And one of the things I want to lead with is that we're in an interesting piece of the development process for the scale of this project, which is that the expression of interest phase usually is an initial indication of what direction developers might be interested in going. But at this time, because of the experience that the town has with this process so far, there's an incredible amount of detail that the town has available as to the physical requirements of the building. And so our recommendations for that first phase were that while we did not consider all of the respondents fully answering the questions that had been proposed in the EOI, that because of this unique position, having them answer additional questions and reconfirm their submissions and come present them in front of the Board of Selectmen was a good next step. And so we helped participate in drafting those questions and were present for those presentations in early January on the 6th and the 8th when all four of the presenters made their recommendations. Now, the second round review that we are currently in, we have some comments that we would like to put forward. I'd like to emphasize that we don't have any stake in the outcome of this project, nor are we looking at the broader interest that the community may have in amenity space or other types of community benefits, but are looking simply at what the economic impact of this project may be, comparing between those different offerings. So within that, the four proposals that we have been looking at are Connolly, previously Northeast Heritage, which is proposing 25 market rate units with a set of recreation amenities, including exercise courts and classroom space and event space. Refined Living has a proposal for 28 efficiency units that would be not deed restricted, but naturally affordable, as well as a community venue and an on-site restaurant. Seven Summits and Stowed are both proposing expansions to the Academy Street site. And so that's an important distinction to make, that these two proposals involve adding a second building where there currently is parking and a basketball court. But that does allow that Seven Summits proposal to include a higher unit count. So 34 market rate apartments, which is the most of any of the proposals, as well as 22 senior housing units, 14 of which would be deed restricted for that 60% or below AMI, which is the target of the Madison Affordable Housing Plan. Stowed is a team that's put forward a proposal for a luxury hotel that includes 4 market rate units on site, but also I believe 64 hotel units and a variety of amenities, including restaurants, cafe, and others amenities on site. So in considering the economic impacts that we would encourage the Board of Selectmen to review, the first is considering the long-term revenue to the town of Madison. The second would be employment on site, the actual jobs that are at the businesses that might be in the building. The third would be the induced spend at Madison businesses. And induced spend is one of 3 categories of economic impact that we look at. And the first is the direct economic impact, that's employment on site. The second is what we call indirect economic impact, which is local procurement from the businesses on site. So in this case, that would be local purchasing from the restaurants, perhaps. But for things that are primarily housing based, that is generally a smaller amount of the overall economic impact. Induced economic impact is the additional spending power of people that are on site. And so in this category, looking at things like the additional tourism revenue that might be possible from hotel use, or the additional income that is downtown for purchasing from market rate units. Pardon me. Lastly, we're looking at housing and the housing count, whether or not it's aligned with Madison's Affordable Housing Development Plan. And so in that way, we're looking at economic impact and the scale of it, considering the likelihood of success, which we might also consider risk, and then considering that against the cost of failure. If there is a project team that is not able to secure their goals, are they set up in a way that is going to be causing a long-term negative impact to the town as compared to a stutter step with an easy pivot? So looking at municipal revenue, the proposal that's been put forward through this EOI is for a ground lease, which means that there is a lease of the ground that the property sits on for a long period of time, typically 99 years, for the owner and operator to themselves own the building and hold the liability, maintenance obligations, and own the improvements that are put on site. This comes with a ground lease payment that is additional to and separate from the property tax revenue that would be received by the town for the buildings. And so in this case, the building being owned by, pardon me, the building being owned by the operator would continue to pay property taxes. And in this case, I'm going to be opening up a second document with some notes that include some of the documentation on what some of those property taxes currently are. The third way that there's an economic impacts to the town is that there can be a payment in lieu of taxes agreement or a pilot agreement, which has a few benefits going for it. So looking at the structures as they go, the ground lease would have a set payment probably on an annual basis for the period of the term of the lease. This was one of the items in the expression of interest that was distributed, and actually I don't believe any of the respondents put forward a proposed amount for the ground lease as they would in a bid step of a solicitation. Were we in a more formal procurement, that might be considered incomplete, but in this case is allowing us to consider the conceptual application of the projects rather than competing on specific price point. The property tax revenue is a little interesting to consider in this building. Currently, Madison appraises the Academy School at about $4.4 million of value, excluding the value of the land, just the building. So at a 70% assessment rate, that does mean that the building would be paying about $70,000 a year in annual taxes were it on the tax rolls in its current state. What is uncertain about this is that because there has not been an owner to appeal those taxes, the current condition of the building may mean that if someone were to hold it privately, they could appeal, and on the basis of either replacement value or income, get a reduction from that amount. Looking at nearby buildings, the Bradley is a 30-unit apartment complex about a third of a mile from the Academy School site. It's primarily offering 1 and 2 bedroom units, which is slightly larger but somewhat comparable to the scale of several of these proposals. That building without the land value is appraised at about $7.8 million and assessed at 5.4. At Madison's current mill rate, that would yield approximately $121,000 in annual taxes, which matches their payments. So somewhere between the $70,000 to $121,000 that a 30-unit apartment building is paying nearby is likely what we would expect from property tax revenue. Several of the respondents have proposed their own valuations and their own methodologies, some of which have not matched the math that I've been able to do on their valuation quotes. So I'm going to be using this range and understanding that the 2 additions to the building that are being proposed by 2 of the respondents would likely meaningfully change the property tax valuation, but that other improvements within the building are likely not going to meaningfully shift the valuation methodology that we would use to comparing these uses. So moving down to the pilot payments, a pilot payments appeal from a developer is that they can be reliably or formulaically set so that they don't vary nearly as much with changes to the mill rate or to variations in the property tax value. That means that for things like affordable housing, there are often pilot agreements. Those are usually done on a per door count and are usually somewhat low, but can be stacked with other market rate pilot payment amounts. The last 2 categories that I just want to highlight are personal property taxes. For apartment buildings, this usually winds up being a fairly small amount, as the personal property of a business would include things like office equipment, lobby furniture, maintenance machinery. However, it would not include the personal contents of apartment units. So there's a significant gap in the personal property tax revenue paid by an apartment building versus a hotel, because the hotel is paying for the fixtures and furnishings throughout each of the units. And they're typically depreciating those over the course of a long span of time. And so for context, the Madison Beach Hotel is paid between $15,000 to $22,000 annually over the last 5 years just on their personal property. And that's varied with the depreciation schedule and their mill rate. And that's on about 33 rooms, which were rebuilt in 2012. And so looking at what new fixtures and furnishings might look like is one way of imagining what revenue from a hotel locally could mean. Lastly, housing that brings new residents to Madison also brings new car registrations whose owners pay car taxes to the town. The average car count per apartment unit for Connecticut of units of these size from the Institution for Transportation Engineers is about 1.36. And an average used car sale in Connecticut is about 30,000, which would yield roughly $638 in car taxes per housing unit. And that's a rough approximation, but is helpful for considering the different scale. Efficiency units are likely to have fewer cars per unit, like those proposed by Refined Living. Senior units may also have smaller car counts, but those would not be present as on-site registrations for a hotel, for example. So one way of looking at this and comparing between these different proposals is looking at the actual agreement structure that's been put forward. So as noted here, in most cases, the respondents had not identified a ground lease payment that they were offering to the town for the actual agreement structure that had been put forward. The exception here is that 7 Summits put forward a pilot payment on a per unit count of $2,200 per unit. And this would be in lieu of, I believe, the taxes and ground lease payment. Typically, affordable housing pilot payments are closer to $400 to $600 per unit count or per door. And so this is one way that they're offering to sort of compete on price, but have a verifiable approach for them. The other outlier here is that Refined Living has proposed an outright $1 million purchase price to the town rather than doing a ground lease structure. And then after that $1 million purchase, there would be an ongoing property tax payment. Connolly has not put forward a projection on the property tax value, and so using the base of $70,000, we can compare what they might be paying on a regular annual basis. Their proposed uses do have a mix, and based upon those unit counts, we expect somewhere around $8,000 in personal property payments and $18,000 in car tax. The Refined Living proposal did come up with their own projection. I did adjust that on the basis of accepting their valuations, but using our own mill rate calculations to be about $95,000 to $100,000 in property tax for the income basis of their uses. And that includes about $15,000 on top of that in personal property for things like the 200-seat restaurant. It includes additional car tax. Seven Summits here stands out on the car tax because of the additional unit count. And Stode has proposed a projection of $1 million in annual payments and property taxes. I will say that looking at Madison Beach Hotel in its current state, for example, and its property valuation, this would be mean that their luxury hotel would need to be valued at about 4 times the basis of the Madison Beach Hotel in order to be paying these tax rates. They do, however, propose an incredible amount of investment in the property, and that will be worth considering. They will also have a substantially larger amount of personal property. Those are payments that are being made on, diminishing amount every year, but additional payments to the town. So looking at the direct economic impact, so we can consider construction and employment and local spend, on-site employment and ongoing property management, and on-site employment in amenities, as well as the hotel employment, which is a clear outlier. These are some rough approximations on general trends and averages in Connecticut. But in the case of our first projected use, we expect 5 to 8 on-site jobs related to both the property management as well as the exercise classes and other facility operations. We also expect a low induced spend rate on the basis of unit counts and compared to the other proposed properties. For Refined Living, we are expecting a higher employment count on site. A lot of that is the proposed restaurant and other uses. The marketplace, for example, optimistically could be thriving with a high full-time employment count. However, the induced spend of 28 efficiency units in particular at the price point at which they've been located is naturally affordable as workforce, does mean that we're looking at a lower induced spend. Seven Summits, we expect to have a higher construction cost because there is an additional building that is put in, so a larger immediate employment hit, but they are not proposing additional uses to the site. So we're looking at 2 to 4 long-time employees on site for property management. However, with a higher market rate count than any of the other proposals, in addition to their 22 senior units, there will be many more people downtown buying things from Madison businesses in this proposal. However, this doesn't hold a candle to, if successful, the additional income that would be possible from the tourism of a luxury hotel. And if helpful, and the board would like to go this way, we can help model what some of those induced spends look like on the basis of average retail consumption for the different customer criteria that would be present in each of these housing levels. But we wanted to provide this as an initial roadmap of things to be considering. So after looking at some of these direct impacts, the other criteria that we were looking at for these different projects are worth going through sort of one by one before we get to their business structures. And so the proposal that we've received from Connolly and Northeast Heritage is for 25 market rate apartments that would be using historic tax credits. Their proposal in particular does have a strong reliance, about 45% of their total capital stack coming from historic tax credits. For those who are not familiar with the historic tax credit structure, it does involve creating a legal entity that is then technically owning the building that is sort of purchased or invested in by somebody who then holds the tax credits and is able to benefit from them. But it does require abiding by a set of both overlapping state and federal historical standards that do limit some of the things that can be done to the building. And one of the things that we should be evaluating and considering is the uses that are proposed for the restrictions, particularly that come from historic requirements. Another impact for the Connolly proposal is that they have requested a 5-year phase-in for stabilization, which typically means that they are not actually executing repayment payments to the town until construction is complete. And then those payments would phase in partially, usually 20% per year, so that the revenue to the town would be delayed over that period of time. For Refined Living, again, this is a $1 million purchase price for 1.55 acres of land. Essentially, they're buying the land that the building sits on. This does not include the exercise fields or the rest of the space. Importantly, they are proposing naturally affordable workforce housing costs through efficiency units, which means incredibly small units. The range that they have quoted is about $1,056 to $1,140 per month, which would meet, if not exceed, the 80% AMI affordable housing target set by the Affordable Housing Plan. So this is adding naturally affordable housing stock that could be accessed by municipal employees or local public service employees. However, they're not explicitly deed restricted. And that is a goal of the plan and would be a quality that the state would be looking for in evaluating housing stock. So this may not actually contribute necessarily to the state's evaluation of the unit count of deed restricted housing. It does include, I guess up until this update, a welcoming and performing arts center that may be better suited for a different neighborhood amenity, but does have a mix of boutique shops and a marketplace that can be a bit of a local business incubator, as well as a seasonal rooftop bar and grill. I would point out that I think that these two uses do come with some potential risks for the projects as a business plan. And part of that is that marketplace retail, particularly in business incubation, while I'm a big believer in from the impact that it can have locally, does require a high level of foot traffic and really needs a high level of spend to thrive. And it is usually a loss leader in that it's trying to bring people into a property, or it is done with a significant subsidy in order to be an economic benefit to small businesses. With the natural, the affordable efficiency units and a potentially amenity that requires potential subsidy to have that economic benefit. There are some questions as to whether or not that will push the price of the additional retail beyond the $22 a square foot that is being paid within the region. The second area that is potentially worth examining for this proposal is that the seasonal rooftop bar and grill, I think, would be a wonderful addition to the restaurant mix of Madison. It, however, could be one of the challenge points with the historic commissions and the actual physical condition of the building. So bathroom access, food service through elevators and stairs would all need to be well assessed and could be a fantastic addition and a unique amenity, but is worth examining from a physical capacity component as a potential risk to the project. The Seven Summits proposal, as put forward, pardon me, has an alignment with the current Madison Affordable Housing Plan. The first is there's a matching unit type to the plan's priorities for studio and one-bedroom units for seniors. There's also affordability targets that match the plan's priority target of 60% AMI. It has a 25% ratio of deed restricted units that is lower than the plan's target of 30% deed restricted, but is still a substantial component. Has benefits that include allowing longtime residents who are downsizing as seniors to remain in the community. And each of these, just like the efficiency units in the refined living proposal, have less impact to town services in things like education and other needs. However, this proposal is requesting that the town divert a portion of the previously approved DECD funding for the community center in order to support it in its current proposal. They are offering that if so, they would be able to offer preference to Madison residents for spaces within the building. If they are not able to repurpose a portion of those funds, they would need to go to the low-income housing tax credit structure, which would require statewide access without preference. So those are things worth looking at within the overall structure. I will also say that this proposal includes additional parking that would be constructed. So in addition to the 24 spots currently in front, there would be 64 spots behind for a total of 88 spots. This does compare, and I would point out, compared to, I believe, the Connolly and Partners proposal that has a lower parking spot projection on site than their expected need by about 12 parking spaces, and they are requesting that the town have a shared parking agreement with them. In addition to peak times for exercise classes aligning with when people are likely to be home, that could be a potential parking pressure on that district. Moving on to the Stode Hotel. We spent some time testing the market viability of luxury hotels. And currently, the projections on price point to justify the economics of the hotel, while ambitious, are within the range of what we're seeing the market currently hold. We are seeing more demand than we have supply, with Madison Beach Hotel regularly reaching capacity and particularly looking for additional capacity for events. And the growth.
Michael, can I just interrupt real quick? Because I know it's a long presentation, but it's been frozen on this one slide, and I wasn't sure if you were. Because as I got into this, I thought you got to have some backup to this. So apologies. I should have probably flagged this earlier.
Yeah.
It was. Did other people see it was frozen on the one slide? So I think you're. What slide are you on? What number are you on?
I'm about to get to slide 9. Let me see if is that working now.
Okay. Now you're on 9, yes. Okay, because it was stuck on 4. I think you'd gone back and so anyway, go ahead.
Okay, I apologize for that. Yeah, in working through just the summary of these different proposals, I wanted to have a little bit of time for some of those unique considerations. In rounding out the last pieces of the, let's see, I think this was caught, so I'm just going to add it here. This is demonstrating the proposed new building location for the Stode Hotel, which is the same location as for the new building in the Seven Summits proposal. Important to note here is that the Stode amenities, which do include some membership opportunities for a club for the community, as well as cafe and restaurants, it does feature a rooftop restaurant proposal, but that rooftop restaurant is housed in the new building as compared to the existing building, and may be worth considering as an additional logistical consideration or challenge. This slide here, though, I think lays out probably one of the two larger differences between a lot of these proposals, and that is in looking at the sources of funding for each of these. First, the Connolly or Northeast proposal was identifying where some of these sources of funds would come from, but not necessarily as specific as some of these others. Moving actually from the left to the right, the Seven Summits proposal identifies their funding as heavily reliant upon historic state and federal tax credits, as well as down at the bottom, several sources of state funding, two of which would need to be either committed from the town or secured with the town's assistance. Overall, the project does score well on their debt load, as well as a little bit lower on equity investment, but because of the senior and deed restricted housing, are relying instead on public support. This dollar amount of almost $23 million, however, is much closer to the town's estimation of the hard costs required that generated our second round of questions and review. So switching to the other proposals, Connolly's is heavily reliant on historic tax credits that I think is a unique exposure and it carries an additional level of risk. The Refined Living in Montano has higher levels of equity investment from other partners, as well as a higher debt load that should be sufficient to cover the project. However, that lower dollar amount of $14 million is still substantially below the expected renovation costs that have been identified by the town. The luxury hotel proposal, I think while ambitious and impactful for the economic impact, I think this slide is probably one of the areas in which the highest risk is being demonstrated, which is that while they do have a component of historical tax credits, they are expecting a substantial loan to cover over 50% of the value of the total project. They are then supplementing that with energy efficiency guaranteed repayment loans as mezzanine capital, and are still looking to raise additional equity funds on top of that they have not yet identified. And so while there are some dollars that could be gated along an agreement that the town could make, for example, the condo buyer deposits, overall, this is still a proposal in which the team is looking both to still secure their financing and to still secure their hotel operator. And that is a substantial risk to take on at this point within the project. So these pieces, as I covered, include low-income housing tax credits and the historic tax credits, as well as repurposing the town's CDBG. In particular, the hotel proposal has a very high loan-to-value ratio and is still dependent upon equity. The last component that I'll identify is that the hotel proposal requires tax increment financing, which is a method by which money is pulled essentially through the town from the future benefits of the increased value of tax property to be put into resources now. It is often used for public sector improvements that facilitate development, like road infrastructure or utilities. It can be used for individual projects. Madison and most of the towns in our region have not used tax increment financing and currently do not have TIF districts, as they're called, set up. It would require several actions of the municipality in order to accomplish, and would also require some exceptions to be made to put that money directly into the development stack of the project itself. The additional risk here is that because they're projecting $1 million in annual repayment of property taxes at a very high valuation for their hotel, this tax increment financing would be adding additional value that they would need to claim to come back and be financed in this way, almost at the scale of about another 50%. Looking at the proposed uses, as I identified earlier, there's a big difference in the projected costs of hard costs of construction. This does offer a side-by-side comparison of some of the development fees and structures as put together. I will say the hotel proposal as well had some mathematical errors that didn't quite sum in their sources and uses documents, but I think this shows their intention of putting about $46.5 million into the project, which would be the claimed amount by which they are projecting their property tax return. That may not necessarily be the way that the tax assessor evaluates the property for tax income, though. Before moving on from this, I think this is probably one of the side-by-side considerations that holds some of the largest impacts. And so before getting to other recommendations or thoughts, I want to open up for questions if there's any on this slide.
I think it's a lot to absorb to see it kind of laid out. I appreciate the way you kind of laid this out in terms of comparing everything. I think we all recognize there's a lot of questions that come out of this in terms of the assumptions that people are putting into the actual project, like and then when due diligence needs to be done further to refine these numbers for each of the different developers. So, but thank you for that.
I think I need to digest some of this too a bit more outside
Absolutely.
this call, given I didn't see it before. So not a dig by any means, but I just think I need to spend a little time with it.
Yeah. So I'll be able to provide this as well as a written narrative report that lays some of this out. I apologize for not having it out in advance for this conversation. I'm glad it's not a decision that needs to happen today. I would say that on these particular numbers, the information that the town has from the prior documents may be very relevant to compare expectations against cost. It is worth considering at this stage of the development process. The expression of interest stage is usually not when people are putting in final numbers on what they expect remediation projects to be. The town did make available a good amount of information from the prior process. That information was in the form of 5 or 6 100+ page documents, and so it did require looking through. I will not comment on whether or not you want to use that as a filter for which of these developers were able to identify those costs more accurately or less accurately, but it would be one potential thing to consider. The other would be working with your engineers and the previous quotes that you have to really press and test the expected costs. I do know that some of the developers were optimistic that they would be able to get significantly lower bids than the town was in its bidding process. But that would be if you were interested in going to an apples to apples comparison in that direction.
Michael, thank you very much for this. This is a terrific presentation. I have 2 questions. The first is, what do you think about the relative pros and cons of selling the property versus a long-term ground lease?
Mm. Selling the property is a larger single bet on one developer that will also attract more interest. I do think that the structure of the ground lease did limit the number of participants who were looking at this as a project. It's just not a profile that a lot of developers typically seek out. What it does provide you, and more of this is how creative you are with what you write into the ground lease, are more gates for non-performance along the way, so that particularly if you have a specific vision of what you would like to see built, say a particular type of community space, you could put in after 3 years, if this isn't built, the lease is canceled and there's a reversion back to the town. Or you could put in other types of performance clauses. Overall, if this was to be sort of a straight economic play, there probably will be a more competitive space as a simple sale. And I think that's the reason why Refined Living put forward their proposal. I will say that considering these options side by side, there's more protections for the town with a long-term ground lease than there is in a sale. Because if Refined Living buys this for $1 million and some of these numbers don't pan out, or the rooftop bar is not accepted by the Historic Planning Commission, or the engineers come back and there's a failure, it is then not back in the town's court, but is in theirs for deciding what happens with the property next. Ultimately, that's a decision of the town, but those are sort of the 2 sides of the coin that I see.
All right. The other one is just for my own calibration. Do you talked about what we've got the building on the tax rolls for as a municipal facility. The little bit of numbers that we saw from the respondents. Do you think that speaks to what the real market value of the property, or at least the structure, is?
So much of this comes to the amount of investment that's required to go into the property, as far as the level of developer interest. I will say the nearest benchmark that there is the 30 units. It's about a third of a mile away, about 2 blocks. And those are differently sized units, but it's paying, almost double. And I think that is a fair market valuation of the current property. With more money put into it, I think this building could be far more valuable and actually could fetch even higher rates. I think there is something really appealing about the older buildings done quite well on the main street. But for the current arrangement of developer interest and the level of money that they have available to put into the project, I would say it would likely be trying to reach that valuation of the Blake.
I have a third question
the
for
Bradley,
you.
sorry. Yeah.
A couple of the proposals colored outside the lines a little bit on the EOI and proposed additional building space, which wasn't contemplated in the EOI. Does that present any issues for us moving forward? Should we be worried that there were respondents or potential respondents that didn't, because they didn't take that, take that extra step and imagine the property in that way?
Yeah. So I would say, again, this is an interesting position because there's way more detail that's being expected from these developers because the amount of work that's already been done than the usual EOI step. But what I would say is that this development process is not a municipal procurement. It is not bounded by the same rules, nor should there be the expectation that you're necessarily going through a funnel. I would say that the EOI phase really is seeing what great ideas are out there that developers have. I would say this luxury hotel proposal is likely one that wasn't expected, and that viewing it as that level of solicitation. If there isn't a proposal on the table that you're excited about now, resoliciting with a bit more focus of direction now that you know what the market's interested in is definitely an option. And it actually would be one of the two recommendations that I would put forward. There's the third recommendation is, it sounds like the current momentum, which is continuing to do due diligence and dialing in the specific numbers of these different plans. But if I were to shift to some of two recommendations that I would have on the basis of comparing these across each other, the first would be if there's an interest in housing from a simple economic impact criteria, considering the risk of the different proposals, my recommendation would be that the Seven Summits Realty housing proposal has the largest impact on a 20-year timeline. It's in alignment with the affordable housing plan, and it matches the rehabilitation and retrofit costs associated with the town's approach. This is not to say that either of the other developers couldn't come back and meet some of these expectations, but as the proposals exist currently, it is, in my mind, a lower risk and closer to feasible approach for the largest economic impact leading with housing. The other choice that I think the Board of Selectmen has is the level of interest or excitement in the idea of a hotel. I think that it has the ability to bring an incredible amount of spend and have a larger impact on Madison businesses than any of these other proposals. But it is distinctly higher risk, both for a team that doesn't have identified investors and operators, a team that hasn't developed a hotel, though they have done modeling and design before, at least in this way. If this is a direction you're interested in going, a refocused solicitation of an RFP specifically for a hotel, I think could generate interest from hotel operators. They could either partner with Stowe or prevent their own proposals. I particularly think that for your market, considering that Madison Beach Hotel frequently finds themselves at capacity, that trying to see if there would be interest from their operators in participating in this type of proposal would be an option to consider. So if this is a direction you want to go, Rex Development could certainly assist with developing that RFP and helping to promote it, along with our partners at the Connecticut Lodging Association. But these are two of the takeaways. There is certainly the third, which is continuing to dial into the actual numbers of what you have in front of you and get closer and closer incrementally. But off of the counts of what we've seen of a lot of now after two rounds, the steps that folks have taken, that those would be my recommendations.
Okay.
Oh, Peggy, is there time for one more question?
Oh, yeah.
Michael, you were properly neutral in your presentation regarding the financing schemes for these four proposals. Just how much of a stretch for some of these are some of these? What would be our level of confidence that in these four projects in terms of their likelihood to achieve the kind of financing that they hope to?
I think I've been somewhat clear on my opinions on the hotel proposal. It is at its current stage. I do think that the vision is a strong one, but there are 4 or 5 different things that need to get pulled off to finish that financing stack. For the Connolly proposal, I will say we don't really have a full amount of information on this ratio. These stars are the categories they identified, but we don't have those firm numbers. I would call out specifically that the TOD and CIF award is a competitive state award that they would have to win against other projects, and is probably the least certain of any of the money on the table. I do believe that in literally cutting a check to the town, Refined Living is putting in developer equity quite clearly. I will say that that's not something I believe you can actually necessarily use a low-income tax credit equity component for. I would similarly say that the Seven Summits proposal is putting in and identifying developer equity and showing how they're planning on structuring their loans. But I would say that they also are requiring some assistance from the town. Each of these teams has experience in closing these gaps. And so I would say there's ways to pull this off, but those would seem to be some of the missing pieces. I would put in the general as well, having being down here in DC. Any changes that might come to federal housing tax credits or historic tax credits could rock the boat meaningfully on how people are approaching development. And so that would be an argument if you feel a level of comfort for moving quickly, and if you don't, for hunkering down.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
I would like to comment though that keep in mind, because this was an EOI, we weren't expecting, fully fledged financing stacks, letters of commitment from banks, and so I think that would be a step later. If we were to pick a partner, we would do that before we would require all that, I think, before we would be moving forward, right? To have some sort of comfort letters coming in from different sources of funding. So there's another level here that before we proceed, to take this, that we would require all those types of comfort levels, and we would have to understand who the actual sources of funding is better. So I think that's, premature to expect that at this stage. But I think it shows the level of transparency and thought that went into this, right? And the knowledge base of the different proposals about how they laid out that financing stack, right? Based on their experience and where they've probably worked on other projects and seen how these financing packages can work. So, there is another layer that we would have to get assurances before we would proceed on this.
So before selecting any one of these proposals, I would say the simple questions before the Board of Selectmen are, would you be interested in this being a hotel? Are you comfortable with another building being constructed on this site? And those two questions shape a lot of the economics. I would argue strongly for the economic impact of a second building that's adjacent. But those two questions are likely worth engaging in. If you're interested in a hotel, I do think that having a focused effort in that direction to involve potentially other operators or partnered operators would be helpful. If you're interested in housing, you can drill down into those specifics and move forward intentionally, but keeping both tracks going may be a bit more of an organizational challenge.
So that's a good segue into the next part of our meeting, which is to talk about that, a little bit about next steps. And we also did get some feedback of other issues that the town is going to have to address, before we can kind of make that decision to move forward. So if the board is good, if I could maybe go back to segue into the materials that I was showing before, I will do that. And Michael, if you could stay on, that would be great, because there might be some questions that come out of it. And once again, this isn't a deciding meeting. I think the goal is to have a deciding meeting at the next meeting, but this is a lot to take in of questions that kept arising, and we were trying to answer as many as we could. So with that, I will share the slides again. Oh, okay. Okay. Is that, okay. So can you see that? It says summary findings?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll move on. We talked about that. This is from some of the committees. I did want to just spend 2 minutes on what the staff had identified, and this attempts to summarize that a little bit. There was some memos from the different departments. And basically what we all realize is that, there's zoning issues here. And we would have to go in and really cooperate to come up with what we'd be comfortable with doing from a zoning standpoint with the Planning and Zoning Commission. They would have to create some sort of overlay or new designation. So there would be things that the town would have to do, unless we went with affordable housing that would qualify under 830G, which allows us to override local zoning. So that would be the one instance where we wouldn't have to do any kind of zoning overlay. Septic was talked, as Trent provided, our health department director, provided a lot of information about that because of the high water usage, particularly with the hotel. his feedback had been, as you saw, most likely we would have to look into some sort of deep system because of the water requirements. And that is that's like a community septic system. It requires different maintenance. And where's this leaching field going to go, right? So if we're leasing where the school is, but we would have to cooperate with any of these developers about where the leaching field would go. As we saw with the community center proposal, there was going to be a new septic system, and the leaching field was going to have to be adjacent to the site. And so we would have to address the septic constraints that would be there and feasibility on the location. I know there's a lot of concern about the septic soils there. So Trent kind of walked through what that would require. And so, we're going to have to do, I think, more work on that to see what's actually feasible on the site, because it could be that it might be insurmountable in terms of the hotel possibly, or really expensive, to whatever you would have to come in to accommodate the needs of that. And then you saw a memo from our director of construction and planning. And he just talked and echoed some of the things that Michael talked about: completion risk. That these were EOIs, right? So light on information. There's more refining that has to go into some of the costs to do the renovation. Just that there just has to be a lot more due diligence, I think, on both the actual proposers and who are proposing these things, as well as the financing. And so just to highlight that there's, more work that needs to be done in terms of the risk with the project. So, I mean, I do have the staff available. Do you want to dig into each of these topics, or you think it's fine today to just kind of highlight? I think this was the takeaway that I had. And I don't know if the board agrees reading the memos, but this was kind of the takeaway I had. We're going to, there's definitely some real risks with each of the opportunities that we're talking about.
I think what this doesn't really comment on, I mean, certainly zoning, septic, and completion are three big important risks for sure. But, Bruce was sort of alluding to some of it earlier. Like, it doesn't really speak to the financial risks either here, which, I think at the end of the day, there needs to be due diligence, whether it be on the housing side or whether it be on the hotel side. So I mean, I just think that's a big piece of this conversation is the due diligence.
Well, and who bears that risk too, right?
Who bears
Is it the
that
town
risk?
versus
Correct.
is it the
That's right.
developer? And
Yep.
And that would have to be mapped out. And that really is because some of them have financing that is going to put some burden of risk on the town.
That's right.
And so we would need to map that out more. But I think that's something where if we pick a path, I think there's a concept here. I think Michael said, we got to decide what's the path, and that's where I kind of was trying to map this out, and too much verbiage as usual. But what are those possible next step? And I feel like the board does have to put a stake in the ground at one point and pick, is there one of these proposals that we feel is the one that we think has the most, not necessarily the most to get completed, but has the most momentum and excitement. And this has to go through a public process, and it has to get voted on by the public. But also, how does it fit with the broader planning? And I think this is something we keep coming back to, that what is our strategy for that whole road down there? And this is something that David Kadamus had highlighted when he talked about the thinking about Memorial Town Hall, the thinking about the chapel building. I think Academy was always discussed as a broader kind of historic district down there that is owned by other municipal buildings, and how it fit into that. And that's where I think we have to think about these projects and how it fits into that broader campus view, and how it fits into all these planning initiatives we have going on in town. The POCD, strategic plan, as we talked about, we touched on this in the EOI, that each of them have elements that serve the needs of some of these, right? Whether it's the affordable housing plan, whether it's the strategic plan, for economic development. So I think we just have to take a step back and have that conversation about the objectives, and then and before we can decide what we want for that row down there. And then that helps us start getting into some bigger conversations about, the adjacent ball fields and how is this all going to impact them? Is it feasible to actually put a large hotel down there without impacting the ball fields? I mean, I think that's a realistic conversation we have to have. Um, and then if we are going to do something, getting into the septic conversation, should we be addressing the whole block? Should we be dealing with, we've got several older septic systems there. And I know during the Academy Community Center discussions, we had talked about creating one larger septic system that would serve that whole area. And then if you were to make that larger investment, could you actually tie in downtown? So there's some bigger planning initiatives. Like, is this a catalyst for all that? So those are conversations I think we kind of need to do, but I do think we have to like weed out, do we want to invest in hospitality, a hotel, hospitality? And I say hospitality because it's not just the hotel, it's also a spa, it's also restaurants, it's all these other amenities that goes with it. So it's not just hotel rooms. Or do we feel that housing is should be a primary use down there? And I think we owe it to the respondents who have been very patient to at least potentially eliminate some of them, So I feel like that is a near-term decision our board has to do. Is there one or two or possibly three that we want to just eliminate? And then we then take the next one or two to the feasibility research that I highlight under here. Regulatory, talking to planning and zoning. How would we make this happen? Is there going to be support from planning and zoning to do this? The Historic District Commission, or is there going to be support with their approval for this, right? Is it really possible to put some sort of large septic, system down there? And what would be the real usage requirements? What can the soils stand? And I think really taking a deeper dive into that, addressing all the parking issues. If we choose the hospitality hotel route, that's going to create, that was one of the big things we heard a lot about, was parking and traffic. And so, what are we really dealing with and what do we need to do to address those issues? And then this land use thing about, do we actually change what we're offering here as part of this plan and allow for more land besides just the building itself? Do we actually offer up, part of the ball field for leaching fields or parking or whatever? And I know there was some people that had said, you know, there are other places in town to put fields. And so is it better to really come up with a plan for that whole area? Maybe you have the hotel with a park down there. So having a community park adjacent to the hotel, and not using, eliminating one of the fields and relocating that somewhere else. So those are all controversial conversations. I know that it's a very touchy subject with people in town, knowing the history of the project. But I think, we need to kind of tick these off and be honest about what one of these projects would require in order for them to be successful. And I just don't know if we're confident enough to say that standalone on site without any additional land, could we actually make a luxury hotel work down there without offering up more land as part of the development plan? So,
Well, they've been pretty upfront about that. They need the extra space to make their model work. I think they answered. They were asked that question directly, and they answered it really very directly. So
Agreed.
So
well,
we
they
know.
talked about the parking. They talked about the parking lot and building into the parking lot. Yeah, but I'm talking about even a further expansion. And then I think that septic system is not going to, you can't, as we know from Academy, it's going to have to go elsewhere, right? So that's going to impact that whole block. So we have to start thinking about what the ideal location and placement it would be for everything if we were to move forward with something like that. So those are things that I think we have to we have to really pin down a little bit more, get, expert opinions on if we were try to move forward with one of these specific proposals. And then then the next step would be, okay, we get this information and we feel like we're ready to move forward and pick a partner. I think then we go out and really get feedback from the public, and have some sort of public hearing process about the actual project. And then also continue this due diligence at a next step. And, do we do an RFP, which Michael's suggesting if we were to do the hotel, we might want to do an RFP because what's coming out of this is a lot different than what was put in the EOI, right? In terms of additional land and all this other stuff. So, and will we really want to now step back and say, what is the best use for the property? What would the package look like? And then would we want to go out and be a very targeted RFP process? So, and then finally, obviously, if we did move forward, we would come and negotiate a package that we could take to the public for a public vote. So this was a thinking of the process. I would argue I wouldn't focus on item number 4 right now. I'd probably focus on 1, which is really, do we feel that with all the information that we've received right now, can we at least start eliminating some of the proposals and potentially even eliminate down to 1? And that would be, I would think, something. And then we need to allocate some funding to take a deeper dive into some of these bigger picture questions. So I guess I open up for conversation.
I think I'm thinking about it a little bit adjacent to what you're saying. I'm thinking about it in lanes that all the proposals fit into. The hotel one is its own lane. The other ones are variations on housing. And you've got the technical issues that have to be addressed. I think probably we need to have some clarity from the town side. Maybe not framing it as a non-starter, although I'm a pessimist by nature, so that's the way I would think about it. But what would have to be true for that hotel to successfully be landed there from the town side? What would that look like? And is that acceptable to us? And if there's an extra burden on a developer, is it acceptable to them? But the starting point would be A, B, and C have to be true for this project to move forward. And I don't think we have that right now. We've got a sense of the septic, but I don't know what that looks like. Does that mean the entire field is a raised septic system? Or does it mean that a strip of, 15 feet wide by 30 feet long is a raised septic system? I don't know. And then if we look at the second lane as a housing or a derivative of housing, that septic question still, is there. But what are the things that have to be true for that type of project to be successful? And can we live with those things that need to be true? And I see that as an internal conversation, not an external conversation.
Well, I think that's what the memos
What number
do.
1 says? That's how I interpreted number 1. Exactly what you just said, Bruce.
I mean,
well,
the staff
we have-
did say what needs to be done in order to make these happen. So if we want to put a hotel down there, then we have to go in and work with planning and zoning and get some sort of zoning amendment or overlay to create, that type of redevelopment. I mean, that's what
Okay.
the memo said.
Presumably that's an administrative exercise for us, though. That's we're not dealing with a physical constraint.
No, but they're the ones that can do it only. So I think we would have to do a referral to planning and zoning, and maybe Aaron could talk more about this, but planning and zoning would have to approve that, so, maybe it's we would need to do a referral, or we would ask them to tell us what they would be considered. There are some political things that we would have to go through, including the Historic District Commission as well on each of these proposals. So, I think that's why it's important. We can't, vet everything.
If a proposal requires, I'm just going to exaggerate here. If a proposal requires 250 parking spaces and the physical space for those parking spaces doesn't exist, then that's a proposal that we probably can't move forward with, right? I'm assuming for the moment that we can all put our heads together and figure out how to rezone and get everybody on board with doing something that's good for the town. But a septic system that can't physically fit, there's no, you can't get around that.
But that's what I'm recommending, doing these additional analysis that's going to take professional review, looking at parking. Like, so if the board, say, for example, said, we prefer, the hotel. So now we would then basically, have an assessment done. We would talk to a professional and go through about, do we have the space to do this? Do we have the soils to support this? What type of system would be required? And I think they'd have to come back and talk about the only place down there you can put, the leaching field or the tank is here to serve that larger capacity. I mean, that's what would be the step. And that's like with parking. If, once again, using the hotel as an example, because it's just very different than what we've talked about before, we would need to have an expert come back and say, this is what you're going to need, given the fact they have events going on, they've got guests there, they've got this and that. We would need to accommodate through with parking spots. So that would be the step if we go ahead and picked a path. But you want to do it on both, I guess is what I'm asking. You want to do housing and hotel. That level of analysis, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, I think they're going to be very similar to each other. It's a very similar exercise. The demand might be different, but not orders of magnitude different, I don't think.
Well, that's not the takeaway I had from the and maybe we could talk, Trent could come up and maybe answer some of those questions. I mean, I think there was definitely a concern about the hotel is going to have a much higher demand in terms of wastewater than some of the housing proposals. Just because they have I think there was a spa component, there's a restaurant, and you have the hotel, plus you have some residential units in it. So,
Yeah, that's what I thought I remember
Yeah.
reading in Trent's memo, is that the hotel option was going to be almost exponentially greater in terms of water usage and, needing to facilitate that through the septic.
so I think it would be a conversation about, and I think Trent is a person to include in that, but maybe it's talking to the group we're working with on our facilities plan about how do we evaluate that area down there further for wastewater. And if we wanted to put a high usage type of use down there, uh, what are to your point, Bruce, what are the parameters? Like, there's probably, my understanding, and Trent, maybe we could raise Trent up to speak to this, but it was very hard to find the best location for all this for the community center. So it could be that, it could be really problematic because of the soil condition and the groundwater levels. So I don't know, is he still on the call, Jeannie?
Yes, I'm on. I just got into
Okay,
the.
great. Yeah, okay,
I,
great. So we're all talking. You're the expert, Trent. So maybe just talk a little bit about that, like, you
right.
know.
So, well, thanks for having me on. So the facts are this, and I apologize if I break up. The facts are the ball field is limiting as far as soil feasibility. As my memo explains, there's some restrictive layers as you get deeper into the ground. And I don't want to throw too much technical things out there, but whenever a development has more than 2,500 gallons a day, it needs a 24-inch separation distance from that restrictive layer. So that's where you get the elevated system concept. But before all of those technical constraints, the ball field needs a lot more investigation and investment.
Yeah, unfortunately you're cutting out, Trent.
All right. Can you?
Uh, okay, yep, you're on.
All right. So there's going to be a great deal of assessment ball field, right? It used to be at least probably a year's worth of water monitoring thing for his property.
I can't understand what
So
he's saying, Peggy.
Yeah.
I think it's so, and I know I talked briefly with Aaron about this before on the call, but I think he's highlighting that in order to assess whether you can put like a deep type, which is DEP regulated system, which this would require because of the amount of use, you'd have to do a lot of testing, and that could take like a year with groundwater monitoring. And Aaron, I don't know if Aaron's here, but we had to go through that process over with the school, the Neck River School. So there is, I'm just saying, there's a lot of work that would have to be done to figure out if you could actually, put this type of system there because of the just the,
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
choice. Yeah,
It's
that's
better.
better.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, let me just finish that point because this is important stuff. So, yeah, so for the ball field, like I said, the soil there is restrictive. There needs to be more investigation and feasibility testing with the location of where this is going to go. A lot of what was proposed is a lot of water use. Now, DEP has different requirements than the Connecticut State Public Health Code. The approval and review process is beyond local and state health departments. So they may require nitrogen assessment, year-round groundwater monitoring, the type of system that goes in the ground for these developments. It can be an advanced treatment unit. Some of the stuff that you guys might have heard around when we talked about developing downtown or some type of community system, those are the advanced treatment units, AT systems. Uh, let's focus on the academy, the community center. Yes, it's Bruce, you brought up, is it 30 by 15? And so for the community center on the west side of the ball field, it was about, it was 2 rows of 150 feet separated 50 feet on center. So those are 2 long rows of what the ball field would have accommodated for just a community center. If we're talking about a hotel, I that's going to be, I don't know if that you can put that in that ball field. Most of the stuff that's over 10,000 gallons, I don't know if you can put that in the ball field. That's going to need expert opinion. I think if we want to know really what we can do for septic with the history of soil testing and what we have known already, then we can reach out to a expert to really examine what that can be done, if at all, for any of these developments or proposals. That's my opinion.
So I think that was why I think that, we would need to decide if we wanted to take that next step, because that is a risk factor that staff has identified with some of the higher usage proposals, right? Um, and and obviously all, these groups, you know, didn't have, I mean, I guess they had access to some of the documents and stuff that were available, but at this level, they might not have spent the time to really go through what the findings had been during the Academy Community Center process. So,
So if we decide that we want to move forward with any of these, I mean, couldn't we simply go to an expert and say, you know, tell us what will fit here in terms of maximum septic system capacity? And then from there, instead of presenting them, say, the hotel or housing or whatever, just say, what is the maximum that we can accommodate in this given amount of space? And then that could just very simply help us to weed out certain options.
Can I make one more comment?
Yes,
yeah, I think that's a
or
question for Trent. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know if it's that simple, but
It,
go ahead,
I,
Trent.
I just want to make a comment of back to the characteristics. It's a filled wet, like there's a lot of fill material. There's not native soil in that in spots of the ball field. So again, in my memo, I did mention that whatever does go in that ball field, it's going to have to be a complete strip out and gut out like what we saw in the CVS parking lot,
Mm.
and replacement of with some septic grade type of sand, and that's for our state proprietary systems. That's like if it's under the DEP threshold, you can put your conventional, traditional type of septic system and stuff like that. I don't think it's a bad idea to explore at what what's our maximum threshold to put in the ground in the ball field. I think I don't know if you're going to be able to have a ceiling, but I think you're going to have more so of like, well, this is what it's going to require if you want to go further in terms of more gallons per day. Like if once you get above 7,500, an expert is going to tell you it's going to require this type of review, this type of approval, and then if approved, what type of O&M is going to be associated with maintaining and managing that type of system.
Well, maybe a version of Jen's question then, which is if we're of the opinion that the hotel is the most intensive use, what does the system look like at that kind of usage?
Mhm.
And is that acceptable to us? And then, in fairness, going back to the developer and saying, okay, this is what you're looking at to do this. Does this still work in your model?
Yep, that was,
But
I agree,
guys,
that
but
was
guys,
another
are we
initial
making this
thought.
too hard? Like, I feel like I kind of like this first option that Peggy laid out, which is we pick housing versus hotel, and then let the developer tell us. I mean, at the end of the day, like I think there's an opportunity here to assume risk, right? And either the town assumes risk or the developer assumes the risk.
Well, then
What
we're
if
leaving out the,
in our hang on, let me just finish. In our contractual obligations with a particular developer, what if we put in there that they assume the risk of the septic system? And in that contractual obligation, they then decide to go one direction or another, which then potentially changes their design in one way, shape, or form. To me, this could be on the developer. I feel like we're trying to assume either too much of the risk or too much of the due diligence process, as opposed to maybe just, these poor developers are putting in a ton of money and we're hanging them out a little bit waiting. I think at some point we gotta pick a horse and move.
I see what you're
So,
saying
Scott,
there.
go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, just that example alone, though, it's already leaving out the demo park option. So it's like we really need to
Didn't
come
get,
up
but to be fair, we didn't
as
get,
part of
so we,
Peggy's question one, next steps.
right, but we didn't get a park option in fairness as one of the respondents either. I
Well, we
mean,
Well,
if
didn't
we
we
ask
didn't
did,
for
because
it.
we didn't ask for it. But step one is saying just determine what do we want? Do we want hospitality? Do we want housing? Or do we want public green space? And we need to determine that, I think, before we go spending money on more professional assessment.
I'm not advocating any professional assessment. I think to me, that's on the developer if in fact that's the direction they want to go.
So I think, Scott, what I'm thinking about is that these potential next steps, they're all leading to a referendum. It's going to be difficult for us to ask um, the winning developer to spend this money in advance of a referendum that hasn't even happened. And so if that's true, so we recommend moving forward. The public agrees with us. We craft the question, and then the developer does all of their diligence, and 6 months later comes back and says, "You know what, guys, this doesn't work." Where does that leave us?
I hear you. I hear you. But at the end of the day, just listening to a lot of the commentary today, I feel like we're looking for reasons not to do something as opposed to reasons to do something.
But it's in the
And I feel like
spirit
we've
of,
got to hang
yeah.
on, but we've got an opportunity, right, to pick one of the respondents that took a fair amount of time to respond to an RFI that we put together, and give them some level of credibility in their ability to develop a solution that works for our town. And frankly, partner with us and collaborate with us as well. I mean, that to me is the power of these options.
Oh, I would certainly love to hear from the developers if they'd be willing to foot the bill for this kind
I
of.
mean, several are on. I don't know if you've looked at the
Yeah, no. I see.
attendees, but several are on listening to this conversation right now. So
I see. But the spirit of eliminating is not to get to nothing, but to get to the one that can be successful, right? So, we've always talked about and know that there's a need for us to winnow the field down, for the broader public conversation.
but
It
in
makes no
fairness,
sense to
Bruce,
winnow the field down to a project that can't logistically happen.
totally appreciate with what you just said. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of us could stare ourselves in the eyes and say that we're housing experts or we're hospitality experts. We're just not. We're the 5 Board of Selectmen who are doing the best we can to put a process in place to get to a solution. We're problem solving here. We're not hospitality experts. We're not housing experts. We're not.
No, well, plausibly, we're Madison experts.
I think I'd like to get us back to Peggy's first point, potential next steps. We've got to start somewhere. And it seems to me at our next meeting or our next special meeting, we, the 5 of us, have to figure out what do we want to pursue. Right now, we're just spinning our wheels. We're going down rabbit holes on technical issues, which I think we all agree we have no expertise in. So in response to Bruce's notion that we think we know what's best for Madison, I think the 5 of us need to take step 1 at our next meeting.
I agree with that, Al. I think, it's kind of come time for us to put a stake in the ground, so to speak. Like
Amen.
we
Amen.
got to
Good.
come out there and we got to be forthcoming with what our
Yeah.
opinion is
Yeah.
based on the information that we have received over the course of time through the academy process, through the OLM Island Avenue process, through the strategic planning process, through the POCD. These are all bits of information that we have that we receive public feedback on, and we need to just once and for all say, based on the information we have from the public, we think this is the option that they would want to see us pursue for further investigation.
At the end of the day, like think about it, like the pub. So to your point, Bruce, about a referendum, right? The reality is we pick an option here, we pick a direction. The public can still say no. So to me, we're doing is steering the ship a little bit here, and then let the developers go do their magic.
Yeah, I just want to put something in front of the voters that can actually be seen through to completion, and not something that is likely to fall apart.
Right, but I don't know if I mean, I'm not trying to discredit what you're saying by any means, so please don't hear that. But I'm just not sure any 5 of us here are in a position to discredit some of these options based on our technical knowledge. We're just not. But that's not our expertise.
Oh, I'm not proposing to offer my opinion as a reason to discredit it all. I'm looking for the information. As far as I think in captured in your thought, Peggy, of potential next steps is bringing this to a broader public discussion. And I think you've got your 3 lanes already identified: the hospitality, the housing, and the demo. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's super productive to talk about a specific proposal if there's going to be an RFP in the future. But you can talk about a concept, and you can talk in general numbers what that's likely to look like. from a revenue perspective, from a cost perspective, from a puts and takes that the town is going to have to make. And we can start to get feedback from the community. What do they like? Where do they want to steer us?
So I think that we've been doing that along this process, right? We've had public meetings on the proposals, um, and we've been getting feedback, through emails and things like that, direct feedback. And I just think though that there's a feasibility thing that we need to take if we have a preferred option. I think the board really needs to, you need to have an opinion, right? And I think that one of these should rise out and we say, look, I think it's worth exploring this a little further. It is going to require some technical expertise. And we have to answer these questions. Is it truly feasible? What does it mean? I mean, anything's feasible, right? So for money, right? So the septic thing is a big issue, right? So I think you have to at least identify what does it mean to make this happen, right? If we're going to make this happen, does this mean that we are going to have to give up some of these other parcels around there or be open to these things? So that way the public will have a truer understanding of what the project is, right? You can't do a bait and switch at the end. And all of a sudden say, oh, by the way, remember we talked about the ball fields? Well, it turns out they're going to have to take half of them, and we're going to have to eliminate one ball field, and it's all going to be septic, and or parking is we're going to pave it and make it a parking lot. I think we need to vet that now versus later, so that when the people can actually view what are the costs versus benefits. But I don't feel like we should be doing that for four. I think we got to narrow it down. So,
I mean,
and that's,
when do you want us to like raise our hand and say what our opinion is?
I think the next meeting, the
Next
goal
meeting.
was to get this was to answer a lot of questions, right? That we
Stay
had,
out of process.
technical things. I feel like we flagged the risks. We understand what we don't know,
Mhm.
right? And we understand what we know now. And I think we've had some really good feedback. And I think the next meeting is we have to narrow this down and say, okay, we need to eliminate a couple or all of them, but one, and come to an agreement about how we want to move forward. But I think to drag along the four, treating them all the same, is disingenuous. And it's not fair to the people who are responding, but it's also just creating, it's time wasted, I guess, too, right? So I think if we can narrow this down and pick one, is it going to be, do we still want to have, do we want to have a housing in there? Do we want to drop the hotel out? Maybe we come back here and everybody said the hotel's a pipe dream and I don't think we should waste any more time on it. I mean, that could be a conclusion one of you might have. I don't have that conclusion, but housing, same thing, right? So I think we need to be honest about where we fall on this. And I think that, Bruce, to your point, hearing, we could hold a public hearing after that, or we could do that. We could I mean, we could have a hearing to just let people feed us information, and then we have that conversation if you want. There's a lot of information out there now on these.
But what if we picked up an option? Let's say we picked one of them, and we then had a public hearing where the respondent was in the room responding to the questions as the expert, as opposed to us trying to presuppose we're the experts. So I just think I don't know. I come from the land of consulting where, a lot of that expertise tends to we rely on the experts, right? You rely on the people that this is what they do for a living. This is not what we do for a living as Board of Selectmen. So I caution us right now on analysis paralysis. I just feel like we're kind of spinning a little bit on too much analysis here. And I think at some point we just gotta boldly make a decision and move forward. And if the public can decide yay or nay, we are not the voting entity.
Yep.
I don't disagree with that. I think though the question um, is do we want to, we have to factor into, what the public wants, right? Because that's what this ultimately is going to be their decision. So I think, is it helpful to have some sort of formal feedback process from the public before we pick a horse? I'm okay picking a horse the next meeting. I feel like we've heard a lot
Yeah,
from the public.
Yeah.
Peggy, I'm
We have
I'm
a
with
lot of
you
information.
on that risk of I bait and switch might be a little strong, but if we were to pick and have the public discussion about, hey, we think this is going to be great for the town and this is going to be great, and then somebody does their diligence, us or the potential developer, and they come back and say, well, you know what? Not only do we need all of the ball field, but we need Memorial Town Hall and we need the Powder House and we need the chapel. And we got to go back to the town and say, oh, yeah, remember that thing that we said was going to be so great? Well, it's now looks a lot different than it was. And I'm exaggerating, I know, but I'm really trying to make Peggy's point. Better we know what it is we're putting forward than having to come back and explain ourselves later that, oh, yeah, it's really not that thing anymore.
But again,
Peggy,
that's
is that a
mutual.
fair summary of what you were trying to say?
That's sort of mutual discovery too, right? At the end of the day, like that's then once you pick the sort of the option that we want to pursue, then there's a collaborative process that can happen between the developer and the town to decide whether or not the option works for the town. And nobody signed a lease at this point, right? You're just picking an option.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Scott, on that. And that's what I think our goal should be at the next meeting. But I think pick an option, but I do think that we should be doing a little bit more homework to dig deeper on that option. That's all. Not analysis paralysis, but there's some simple conversations that could be had to bring clarity to this. And then I think these are pretty basic questions. Can you build a septic system that would, serve a high use like the hotel? And maybe that's a couple conversations with some experts. Yes, you can, but that means you're going to have to give up X, Y, and Z acres. I think it'd be worth
Why,
having
but
that.
why is that a conversation we need to host and entertain as opposed to whatever option and developer it's there again it likely will be their
Yeah.
cost and their consultancies to figure out whether they can or cannot do it. They're the ones taking the risk. We don't have to take the risk.
Yeah, but you're also assuming that we would go with the one respondent, and Michael Harris is recommending that we might want to do a more formal RFP once we decide, yes, we want a hotel. Yes, we're willing to give up some land in order to accommodate septic system and parking, right? So that's a different package than what had been in the expression of interest. So then like, and I'm not saying that's the preferred path, but that is the conversation we need to have. So, because if we are changing this, right, more, and Mr. Harris commented on this, it is looking different than what we put out originally in that EOI, right? Because now we're adding in additional land. We can narrow down perhaps, what our vision is for this. I think that, and this is just having gone through this, I think we should try to tie this into the septic issue into all the buildings in there. Like we need to have something, a win for the town would be able to address the wastewater issues that we have in that whole block there. We've got all these old antiquated septic systems with the other buildings. We've also talked about downtown and how it would be good to have some sort of way to address the wastewater issues with downtown. There's been studies on that was done years ago. Do we see this as a catalyst to tie into a broader, public benefit project that would serve that block of buildings as well as downtown? So that requires us to step up more, right? We can't lay that we can help them pay for it, or, and participate in that. But I feel like that's a conversation that we need to lay out that we would be willing to do, or that we would want to incorporate in any kind of proposal moving forward. So, anyway, obviously a lot to think about. I think that there should be some, it sounds like we're all okay at the next meeting moving forward with something more detailed, and at a minimum dropping some of the other, proposals that we feel we just aren't adequate.
Mhm.
And then and I think in the next, week or so, I'm going to work with Trent a little bit more on the septic thing. I mean, Jen, you're kind of saying, well, just back of the envelope, back into what we can do, right? From
Yeah.
some basic parameters. And I think that's
Yeah.
an exercise maybe that we can talk about with Trent that just gives you at least a little bit of an idea about what our restrictions are for that site. Um, so this is where the right way to do this type of stuff would be to have an overall plan, right? About what the town wants, and then, going out with very specific guidelines on what we want to see at that property. Academy's always been different. It has a history. And so we've never really been able to do that exercise. But at the same point, we have to be conscious of the fact that, this has been a 20-year debate. And we have people that have really come back and put a lot of effort into creating some great ideas for the building. So I think also the other piece of this is when we talk about the park, the goal of this EOI, one of the goals in it was preserve the building, historic preservation, redevelopment. It's in our historic district, it's on the historic registry. So that has to be a driving force behind doing this. And the park does not provide that, right? So I think with this, I hope I think we've set ourselves up for a meeting. I think we can have some thinking, and I'll maybe shoot out some ideas about how to structure that to the board in the next meeting, like what that vote could look like and what it would mean. Maybe we just need to marinate it. It was a lot to take in today. All very good information. And then we figure out how we want to move forward with this.
Hmm. Next
That
meeting, lay our cards on the table.
Okay. So with that, then I want to thank Michael Harris. I want to thank the staff. I think they did a great job really looking at this. There's a lot of good information, and to be continued.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the public that are watching this that are probably very frustrated, but we'll get there. We'll get there. So with that, then I guess item number 14 doesn't have to be an extensive conversation. I think that basically, I know there's been a lot of questions that have come up the last several years. What we've done is try to take the fund balance, and this is all part of our Madison investment plan. And we've tried to strategically use that money to infuse into our capital plan, right? To shore up the balances, to make sure that we have funding available to complete the projects in the capital plan. And the town charter requires us to have a town meeting to appropriate funding out of that for anything over $250,000. The debate came up as like, well, these appropriations are kind of assumed as part of the CIP process. And the capital plan is part of the budget referendum. So do we really need to have a town meeting? Is it just already included in there? And is this a necessary step that needs to be taken? And then I know there's been a lot of concern of the public that the public isn't aware that these appropriations are tied to the budget. So we did think a bit about this, and we did consult with town council, and her opinion was that we have to have the only way to use the appropriation out of the fund balance is either to do it through a town meeting or as a referendum question. As always, you need to get voter approval for that. So that was her view. It didn't seemed adequate as part of the CIP kind of component of the budget. So I think then, it gets more into just making sure the public understands this. And that's where I think there's been some confusion, like what we're doing and why. And I think it's always been transparent. We've talked about it in a lot of public meetings. There's a way we could incorporate it as a funding source as part of what we publish in the paper. That was an idea that our finance director, who could not be here on the call tonight, so we could note it in the paper so people would understand that the balances in the CIP account in the future are assuming that these appropriations happen. so that's one way we could address it. We've always had it in our budget hearings. So I guess I just leaving it for discussion. I mean, everything we've been doing is appropriate based on the charter, and I think it's just more trying to address community concern about this. You're muted, Bruce.
Scott did that to me. He's remote controlling my microphone because he doesn't want to hear me. I think that the simplest way to deal with this is probably the best, and that is to, as in the public discussion about the budget, you've got a fairly concise table of what the budget is, what's driving it, and what that bottom line number is. That then gets labeled, your new property tax dollars are going to pay for this. There can be other spending that contemplates a special appropriation, or special appropriations that are also contemplated in the budget, and just simply included in one of those very early slides of the public discussion. Putting it in the legal notice, a special vote. I don't know that really accomplishes much for us, other than just trying to give a plain English explanation of, these are the monies that we're going to use your property tax dollars for. This is the excess fund balance. We want to do some of our capital projects. We want to dip into that. We know we're going to dip into it. Maybe we don't know exactly when, and maybe the numbers will change a little bit, but I think it satisfies that issue of transparency. It also is continuing education, because the budget is, there's a spending side and there's a funding side, and really, as taxpayers, we only vote on the spending side. We don't vote on funding. So, like you said, Peggy, it's been right. It's been proper. It's not the government trying to secretly increase spending without the taxpayers having a voice. It's just confusing. So let's approach this from a perspective of educating the public, and not procedurally wrapping ourselves up in more stuff.
Well, it's no different than if we're going to get a grant either, right? We that's another funding source, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes the grants don't come through, so then we have to rethink how we fund it. But I think one of the important things is that when you vote on that budget, all you're voting on what we're putting into this capital accounts every year, right? And so those are savings accounts that can go on for 5 years. So you're just voting on, I want to put X million dollars into the fund that's going to fund all these projects. And I think there seems to be some confusion sometimes that if we do an infusion in it, what we're doing is putting it in so that there's enough funding there over the 5-year plan to meet the spending plan. So it's not really like a one-off thing. And that's like, I know people talk about, we'll just pull a project out and then the budget's going to go down with that amount of project. It's not. The budget is not going to go down. If you pull $3 million out of the capital plan, the budget doesn't go down by $3 million. That $3 million was approved to be saved up for a period of at least 5 years, and oftentimes longer, because we push projects out a lot. So, and so I think that's where maybe some of the confusion is when we do these appropriations, but I'll let others weigh in. It sounds like people are good, just stay status quo, but go ahead.
Yeah. I agree. Yes. I mean, that's sort of the point of why we saved this money. It's like having a savings account, right? And we're just allocating the money to go use it in a variety of different ways to benefit the town. But the money is already there. It's already been taxed. It's already been put aside. Now we're leveraging it. And our role as an elected official is to help figure out the right ways to go leverage it.
Right. And it just comes back to the education piece, like Bruce said. I mean, the budgeting process not for the faint of heart. It's not something that you could skim over and have a complete understanding of, especially when you're looking at CIP and town budgets and Board of Education budgets and who has a say in what and all of that sort of thing. There's a learning curve, even for any of us as we enter into one of these boards and start digging into the budgeting process. So, I feel for the general public who doesn't have the same amount of touch time in this process as we do. So just as much as we can do to continue to educate throughout the process, that's our job. That's our job to do that for the public.
And maybe to amplify what you're saying, Jen, and you have the Zoom thing on too. It keeps doing that. Kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm not hating it, by the way, but it's pretty cool. Um, I think it's our job to help simplify the process, right? To make it very simple, transparent, easy to understand for the public. And could we always do a better job with that? Absolutely.
This process has been evolved over the years by many elected public officials from both parties. It's in some ways it has stood the test of time now. The system seems to work. I've been around long enough to remember when this system did not work. But the current capital budgeting system seems to work very well. Yes, it's hard to understand, but I don't think it's any harder than any other system to understand. So I'm very comfortable with the way we're doing things now. And I think there will always be folks that perhaps look over our shoulders and somehow jump to a conclusion that maybe just isn't accurate. But to me, this is not broken.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I know we just wanted to have a conversation, some questions had come up, we explored our options, and I think, people feel that, I think we just continue with the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. All right, well, with that, I'm sure we're all ready to do have dinner, have a cocktail, whatever, after this meeting. I guess we have citizens comments. So I just ask you to raise your hand, state your name and address, and please limit it to 2 minutes. It's been a long meeting, so.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Ashley Roker-Rainier. I live on Summerhill Road. I'm the president of Stowed. We proposed the hotel development. I wanted to just do two things. One, address some of the inaccuracies in what Michael Harris presented. Starting with the financing section, he said the loan to value ratio, or the amount of debt to equity that we would have on this project, is very high. It's actually very standard for hospitality development, and we've already been in discussions with the industry leading lenders and consultants in the hospitality sector who've confirmed the structure and the economics and are comfortable and ready to actually shop that debt for us. We've also already circled the equity as we shared in our previous meeting. I don't think our live comments were taken into account in his assessment. And so we aren't disclosing who those private investors are, but we have already secured the equity. As we also mentioned in the live session, the tax increment financing is not required for us to do this project. We could cover it through equity. So I wanted to clarify that. I also think to say that not having an operator at this stage of the development should not be considered a pitfall of our project. We've already, as we mentioned live, we have had preliminary conversations with very high-end operators who are interested, but for us to have selected an operator at this stage would be inappropriate for a project that doesn't exist. It would damage our reputation in the industry to have brought an operator into the project at this stage. And then finally, I think the last thing to just say, the process that the town has undergone through this EOI has been more akin to an RFP, asking private developers to provide IP rather than just a mere expression of interest, which could have just been an idea on a page. And so suggesting that the town will take that IP to solicit additional bids has legal ramifications. And I think the fact that Rex proposed their own services to make fees soliciting additional proposals is inappropriate and very unappreciated as someone who's been engaged in this process since September. And then finally, I wanted to just really echo what Scott was saying. We've said from the very beginning that we wanted to partner with the town in the exploration of this concept, and that would include financial contribution to things like feasibility. Any developer who has proposed something on this site should have already circled feasibility costs as part of their pre-development stack. And so if someone isn't willing to make that investment, I think that's a red flag. I also think there's a lot of rigidity in what I'm hearing around assumptions, like, oh, if this septic system for what is exactly proposed doesn't work, then we have to throw the whole thing. I think a developer would never approach a site that way. You would obviously adapt to either systems design, to investment into a system, or relook at the programming altogether to see what would pencil. And so I also think the town's missing out on creative pathways that could be, explored in alternate by not partnering with the developers. I think, even if the town does down select to 2 developers, maybe those developers want to partner with the town on the funds to fuel septic feasibility so that we're all have some skin in the game and know what's going on before we get to a town vote, because we don't want to go to a vote either and then find out that we can't actually do what we want to do on the site. So again, maybe there's frustration in my voice. I think it's been a long process already. I think it would be appreciated if there was direction moving forward. And just thank you to the board for continuing to push it. And we are here to engage with you and are very eager to do that.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Any other hands raised?
No, there are not.
Okay. I guess with that, the motion
Wait,
to adjourn.
Andrew Wood just raised his hand.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andrew. Andrew, you're muted.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yep.
Thank you for useful presentations this afternoon. Very informative, both from Michael and from Peggy. Ashley, thank you for your clarifications. I do believe, speaking as the chair of the EDC, that you have our opinion in front of you, and that remains the case and was somewhat confirmed by Michael Harris's presentation. But I do believe that Peggy's next step, as she outlined, is the correct approach. I encourage you to decide whether or not you wish to pursue hospitality, the hospitality option, notwithstanding the risks which are now clearly laid out, or whether you want to pursue residential, in which case you have 3 other options to consider. So I encourage you to prevaricate no longer, take a clear decision, and as to whether or not you wish to pursue residential or hospitality or a park, and give us some clear direction. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any other comments then? No more hands raised?
No.
All right. Well, with that, motion to adjourn.
Moved.
All in favor, say aye. Thank you, guys.
Aye.
Appreciate the dialogue, and thank you for everybody that helped us today.